Hey, good morning, everyone. Wow, and this is such a thrill already. We're getting into week 14, but I see that I've already got three individuals who have tuned in early. I'm guessing I'm glad that I re-upped my premium on X. So thanks for joining me so early this morning. This is new for me, actually, and it's new for the Downfield Read. I usually have a special guest on with me, Sean, from Total Apex Sports and Yardbarker. He's a writer there. If you haven't checked him out, it's at the Coach's Desk. He has some really great information, and we usually collaborate really well together. Unfortunately, he will not be with me today, so you just got me. But thanks for tuning in. I know you got other options like Barstool Sports, Fantasy Live, and a bunch of other people that I won't tell you about because otherwise you're just going to go and watch them. And why would I want you to do that? The one cool thing about here is that we're small enough yet to where if you do have a question, please go ahead and put it in there. If you've got a fantasy football question for me, I've got a 100% answer rate, if you want to call it that. So some of the other bigger guys might not get back to you. And I'm not ashamed to say that sometimes I go onto their threads and I'll poach their people away and I'll answer their questions for them. And that's how I get followers. But more times than not, it works out and people are happy with the advice that they get. If this is the first time that you're watching about your fantasy football, I'm guessing you're in a pretty dire situation here with week 14 and there's a lot of bye weeks. We'll talk about what players that you're going to want to start this week. Maybe some last minute acquisitions if you've got somebody on a bye or if somebody stole all the quarterbacks that were available and you had Lamar or not somebody on your bench. So we're going to go over everything there. So thanks for tuning in. When you've got questions, go ahead and drop them in there and I will get to them ASAP. But we might as well go ahead and get started. Again, thank you for tuning in. Again, this is new for us. We usually do this Friday nights. So Sunday mornings, sometimes we've done it Saturday afternoon. The Gridiron Goddess, Susan, if you follow her on Instagram, she does a lot of stuff there. She's collaborated with me a few times as well. But tell you what, let's go ahead and we'll get started. If you've got questions, drop them in here. If you're new, basically this is what I do. I'm going to run through the quarterbacks, the running backs, wide receivers, tight ends, and defenses. Kickers don't really matter. They're a dime a dozen unless you're holding on to somebody who's had a great year so far, like Fairbairn or Boswell or one of those guys. But I tell you what, let's get right into it. Week 14, in some playoff formats, this is the last week that you have before you get into the fantasy football playoffs. And I hope that you're watching because of that. If you're not, if you're like me in one of my leagues where you get to play the role of the spoiler, I love to do that too. So you can play defense in fantasy football as well by picking up some guys and maybe being the spoiler or the bad guy and forcing somebody or beating somebody out of the playoffs, I might say. But for week 14, you've either got 1 or 2 weeks left. That's about it. It just kind of depends on how many teams make your playoffs this year. I've got one league where, hey, there's 12 teams, 4 teams go to the playoffs. We only need 2 weeks, so we use weeks 16 and 17. In another league, we've got 8 teams that go to the playoffs. And obviously, this is the last week before those playoffs because you've got 3 rounds. So week 14, the bye weeks in the NFL. You've got the Baltimore Ravens. You've got the Denver Broncos, the Indianapolis Colts, the New England Patriots, the Washington Commanders, who maybe, hopefully, I don't know how you feel about this, might be going back to the name Redskins. I think that would be really cool. And then you've got the Houston Texans. So a lot of big players on those teams that you might need to pick up a replacement for in order to make the playoffs. And, here's, too little, too late at this point in time. When you're playing fantasy football, I'll give you a little hint or a little tip. When you're drafting, you always got to look at the bye weeks. You've heard people say that, and I've heard other people go, you know what, I don't pay attention to the bye weeks. I really don't care. You really have to, because all of these teams are really good when you're drafting players or when you're picking up players for the future. Obviously, you've got aspirations of making the playoffs. You want to be able to get there. Make sure that half of your team isn't on bye. I've seen a couple of teams do that this year, especially for this week. There's a lot of good players that are on bye this week, but please make sure that you're watching that because it could be something, hey, should I draft DK Metcalf or DJ Moore? Well, who have I drafted so far and what are their bye weeks? You don't want to, handcuff yourself right away to having to try to figure it out later in the season. That's my strategy anyway. Some people have a strategy of, I'll just forego 1 week and I'll have all my guys on a bye week and we'll do what we can just to, sacrifice 1 week and have the rest of your season intact. But here we go for quarterbacks. Some big names out there, like I mentioned, with the teams that are not playing this week. There's no Lamar Jackson. There's no Jaden Daniels. There's no Bo. And Bo has been great, right? If you picked up Bo, and I was a big proponent of picking up Bo Nix, even after week 6, week 7, week 8, and he was still only owned by like 30% of all fantasy leagues. These guys are all on a bye. So what do? Well, I'm going to go over your must starts. If you've got these guys, you're definitely going to start them. But if you can feel really good about these first three guys, because these are kind of the no-brainer must-start individuals that have the best matchups for this week. And while you might not have a Bo, I hope you got Joe. Joe Burrow at Dallas this week seems like the ultimate must start for quarterbacks this week for the weekend. Burrow is a top 3 or 4 quarterback in all fantasy formats. I don't care what format that you've got, if you got a -1 for a sack or anything like that. He's a top 3 or 4 quarterback this year to date. I'm glad that I was able to actually get him in one of my leagues with the 92nd overall pick in the draft. I was actually kind of shocked that he was still there. Luckily for me, I loaded up on wide receivers and running backs, and then Burrow fell to me. I don't know what quarterback he was that dropped to me, maybe number 9, number 10, whatever it was, but he was a hell of a steal at pick number 92. Cincinnati's D, what you have to take into consideration is Cincinnati's defense is just trash. I feel bad for people that, and I'm a Ravens fan, obviously. So I feel bad we beat them twice, just going to say. I feel bad for Cincinnati fans because Joe Burrow really should be included in that MVP voting or that MVP conversation at least. And he's not going to be because the team is trash. The defense gives up 40 points per game. But you know what? That's good news for fantasy football owners of Joe Burrow because it just means that he's got to throw a lot more, especially against Dallas. Dallas has really nothing to play for at this point in time. So it's really just a pride thing for them. But again, they could put anybody in, right? I mean, they could start Trey Lance if they wanted to, and he'll probably end up throwing for 3 touchdowns just because the Cincinnati defense is terrible. So start Joe Burrow. This is a real easy must-start candidate here against the lowly Cowboys, but they will be throwing probably the entire game just because their defense is no bueno. Number 2 is Jalen Hurts, another top 5 quarterback in a no-brainer versus Carolina. The Panthers have nothing to play for at this point, so I would expect them to actually play hard, and the players on their team are really going to be playing to keep their jobs. It's a showcase game, right? It's like, hey, either re-sign me, keep me on the team, or at least I might get somewhere next year and get re-signed, which is part of the problem with Deontay Johnson right now. If you're following him, he doesn't feel appreciated. He's in a contract year. He wants to play, not playing. Now he's suspended for not playing versus Philadelphia when he should have been playing, whatever. But back to Jalen Hurts. The Eagles have to keep up with the Lions, really. So they're not going to take any chances against Carolina. Carolina should come out fast and furious against them, try to put up a lot of points. I'm not saying that they're going to be able to cash in on that, but they are going to try hard at least, and you've got that working for you. But the Eagles are not likely to take their foot off the gas, and obviously you know about the tush push. You get a pass interference call in the end zone. Now you've got the Eagles on the 1-yard line, and Jalen Hurts is probably going to get that call. So Jalen Hurts, another good start for this week. And then my third must start for the week, Baker Mayfield, who's just outside of the top 5 in fantasy football, even without having his 2 top wide receivers throughout a part of the season, at least. He's going up against Vegas, right? And Tampa Bay is tied for first with Atlanta in that NFC South. And they've won 2 in a row, while Atlanta has lost 3 in a row. So they're playing well at the right times. You hear about December football. That's them right now. You've got Atlanta that's got a tough matchup today against Minnesota. You've got Tampa Bay going to Las Vegas in a game that they should very well win. And the Buccaneers can, without pun intended, the Buccaneers can smell the blood in the water. I expect Baker to take helm of this team like he usually does, put the team on his shoulders, get this win, try to get ahead of Atlanta as much as they can. They are not only very much in the playoff hunt, but they are very much a contender to win that NFC South. So look for Tampa Bay to continue to play super hard throughout the rest of the year. On the flip side, we've got the must-sit candidates. And the must-sit candidates are, my first one is Bryce Young. I know that he's had a couple of good weeks. He's going against Philly. And that should be really all that I need to say. If you've watched any kind of football at this point in time, you know how well Philadelphia's defense is. Young shouldn't even be on your team in the first place. So if you're desperate, if you're in a bigger league, if you're playing 2 quarterbacks, shouldn't be on your team in the first place. But if he is, just go ahead and drop him. His matchups for the rest, if you even do make the playoffs, are not good. So go ahead, take him out, drop him, do whatever that you need to do with him because, again, if he's on your team, clearly you have no idea what you're doing, and you're probably not in the fantasy football playoffs anyway. If I have to explain Quinyon Mitchell and who he is, Darius Slay, Cooper DeJean, you haven't been paying attention. These guys are shutting down every big wide receiver in the game. Those are the DBs, or at least 3 of the DBs that get played in Philadelphia. Quinyon Mitchell is hands down going to win offensive defensive player of the year this year. He's been shutting down everyone. He's been fantastic this year. And I've kind of boasted about him earlier in the season about how good he is. But Bryce Young will try to throw. He's not going to put up the big numbers that he had over the last few weeks. So keep him on your bench. He is not going to emulate what he has been doing to showcase that he is still deserved to be that number 1 draft pick from 2 years ago. Going on to the first round draft pick this year, the number 1 pick overall, also sit Caleb Williams versus San Francisco. Yes, Williams has had 2 games in a row where he's put up some good fantasy numbers, but you have to look at who the opponents were. It was against division rivals, first of all, so teams end up playing a little bit harder for whatever reason that is. But it was against Minnesota and Detroit. And let's be honest, their pass defenses are not good. Detroit gets lit up all the time, almost just as badly as Cincinnati does. Their pass defense is not good. So that's why Caleb was able to actually put up some decent points against them. Minnesota's defense is really not very good anyway. Remember watching them when they had a 28-3 lead maybe against Green Bay, and they ended up pissing that away and it almost went into overtime. Either way, any quarterback can get up on these teams. That's what Caleb had to work with the last 2 weeks. This week against Philly, that is not going to happen. I'm sorry, not against Philly, against San Fran. It's not going to happen. San Fran has something to play for at this point. I think the Chicago Bears season is pretty much done. They've already fired their head coach. At this point in time, they're just kind of playing to get reps in. I don't see a lot of heart in that team going forward through the rest of the year. Against San Fran, they've got a lot to play for. I don't think he's going to do much in that one. So we've talked about 2 number 1s overall. Let's talk about Mr. Irrelevant. On the opposite side of that game, the Chicago-San Francisco game, I'm not a big fan of Brock Purdy this week versus Chicago. San Fran's offensive line is banged up. It's very, very suspect. They haven't been playing very well the last couple of games. Christian McCaffrey and Jordan Mason are both out. Deebo Samuels has been a bust recently. I'm sorry if you've had him on your team and you're relying on him for points. He hasn't done a whole lot. Brock did not look right last week coming back from that injury. So I don't like this matchup against Chicago, which their defense has been carrying them most of the year this year, their special teams and their defense. The Bears defense is one of the best in the league. So just find someone else. I probably wouldn't go with Brock Purdy this year. He's not a very smart play at this point in time. Who do you go with? Well, let me tell you, here's a couple of sleepers that are, and I call them sleepers because they're outside of those top 12. Usually it's a 12-man league that you're in or a 12-person league that you're in. So these are quarterbacks that could possibly be still available at this point, or maybe they're on your bench. But these are the guys that I see that are going to be replacements for those bye-week quarterbacks or the quarterbacks that have not very good matchups. Call me crazy, but I like Justin Herbert this week against Kansas City. The Chargers lost to Kansas City in a close game in week 4, and now they have the chance for redemption. And everybody kind of writes off the Chargers, but like it or not, they're a playoff team. So if they can take KC down a notch this week, they might not have to take them down a notch in the playoffs. So that's how I would look at it for him. Like I said, lost a close game in week 4. Chargers are a legit playoff team in the AFC. It's going to be a prove-it game for them as well. So I think Herbert comes out. He comes out throwing. They don't have J.K. Dobbins in there. They do have Gus Edwards, but let's face it, Gus Edwards has not looked like Gus the Bus from Baltimore. Man, that got a flat tire a while ago, I guess, because he's only averaging like 3 yards per carry at this point in time. So Herbert's going to have to carry that team against a very good run defense in Kansas City, but it could open up the pass. Ladd McConkey, let's get into him real quick because I wanted to look him up just to find out if he was actually playing this week or what his status was, because he was questionable last time I checked, and I forgot to check this morning. Los Angeles Chargers, let's look at Ladd. And it looks like he is still listed as officially questionable yet with that with a knee and a shoulder. So keep your eye on him until game time, or I guess until noon here. We've got about an hour and a half before you have to make a decision on Ladd McConkey. Maybe if somebody has gotten rid of Quentin Johnston, I know how that sounds. If you've watched him play the last couple of weeks, it's not very good. But keep an eye on Ladd McConkey. That's really going to determine how well Justin Herbert plays. He's been targeting the hell out of him the last couple of weeks. But I like Justin Herbert as a sleeper this week. Sleeper number 2, Aiden O'Connell. And again, we're talking about sleepers, right? I just mentioned Tampa Bay and how Baker Mayfield was going to light it up. He's going to be one of your top players of the week this week as far as a quarterback. Well, if you've got one guy lighting it up on one side, you're going to have to rely on another guy. Aiden O'Connell has not looked bad over the last couple of weeks. And here's what I will say about him. Obviously, you've got the offensive rookie of the year candidate who should be talked about a hell of a lot more because he's breaking records at tight end, Brock Bowers. He should be talked about a lot more. He's a great target. He's fast. Nobody is able to really cover him. He's got a couple of records that he could break today with a couple of weeks left to go in the season. So the one thing that you're going to want to look for Las Vegas, though, is their other weapon in Jakobi Meyers, and I'm just looking him up to see if there's a status. He's still questionable with a bad ankle. They haven't updated that at all either, so keep your eye on him as well. He could go off. So AOC, whose nickname I absolutely hate, is in kind of an audition mode as well, playing for Las Vegas. Any other quarterback need a team for next year, might be willing to give him a shot. I don't know if Las Vegas is going to continue to go with him for next year. Rumor has it they're probably going to draft a quarterback. They're probably going to make a big push for a quarterback. Hopefully it's a bigger push than how they tried to get Elway, and the league doesn't block them there. That was a long time ago, though. But as I mentioned before, Tampa Bay will likely run up the score, so it will be a great passing situation for O'Connell today. You might get lucky, but again, keep your eye on Jakobi Meyers there because that could be a big target that he is without for today. My third sleeper, and maybe I like this one the best, I'm not really sure, Will Levis versus Jacksonville. And I think it depends on what kind of a league that you're in. I started Will Levis a few weeks ago when I had Joe Burrow on bye, and he took like 9 sacks. Dude lost me like 9 points just in sacks alone, and he threw like 2 interceptions, didn't do very well. But Will Levis, this is why I like him. It's versus Jacksonville. I like any quarterback versus Jacksonville, really. They give up the most passing yards per game. They give up the most total yards per game. They give up the 4th most points allowed per game. And you look at a game like that and you go, well, how the hell could Will Levis not do well? Well, it's because his offensive line is terrible. He gets sacked all the freaking time. So take that with a grain of salt. Will Levis, if you're in a pinch, I like him this week. Somebody asked me, one of my great followers that I have on X, asked me he gave me a list of guys. Hey, who should I start, him or him? Otherwise, I could pick up these other 4 individuals. So Will Levis was my second one. The guy that I did like actually the most out of that grouping was he could actually play Murray, and Murray's going to be a good play for this week as well. Kyler Murray against Seattle. So that's what we've got for the quarterback situation at this point in time. Again, if you've got questions, please go ahead and drop those in. I'm not seeing any as of yet, so please feel free to drop those into the comments and ask away with that. So we've got running backs. Let's get into running backs now. How I like to do this, if you haven't watched in the past, is I break up my running backs as far as, you start 1 quarterback, I go over the top 12. You start 2 running backs, I go over the top 24. So I'm going to give you some picks for an RB1 type of a situation, and I'm going to give you some picks for an RB2, as well as those individuals that you should sit and the potential sleepers for the week as well. My top 3 should be also no-brainers as well. Saquon Barkley has the best matchup this week, doesn't he? I mean, versus Carolina, this should be like feasting day for him. As long as Sirianni doesn't come out and try to do anything stupid, and he might because it's happened this year, but he could come out and try some trick plays just to kind of get ready for the playoffs, try some new stuff against a team that's not doing very well. Saquon Barkley should feast. My real concern would be if they run up the score real high against Carolina, they could take Saquon out just to preserve him. But I think what we've seen in the past, they keep Saquon in until the game is almost officially dead and they're halfway pounding that last nail into the coffin. So Saquon versus Carolina, they give up the most total yards per game. Carolina gives up the most rushing yards per game. They give up the most points per game. I mean, it's a defense that, again, Philadelphia should be able to run all over them. It shouldn't even be a close game. I wouldn't be surprised if Philadelphia wins by 17 in this game. So, number 2, we've got Alvin Kamara. Alvin Kamara is currently the 5th best fantasy football running back, again, depending on what kind of format that you're playing on. He is playing at the Jets, who not only give up the 4th most rushing yards per game, but with whichever quarterback that they decide to put in between DeVito and Locke, and it looks like it's going to be Drew Lock, the Saints should be able to run the ball easily and get out to a healthy lead. But the Saints have probably been the most bipolar team in football the entire season. They're not really in the playoff contention anymore. They've only got 4 wins, if I'm not mistaken. They're 4-8 at this point in time. But then again, you've got Atlanta and Tampa Bay that are only 2 games ahead of them, so they could still win the division. It's really weird. If they can play how they were in the beginning of the year in the first 2 weeks, awesome. They fired their coach as well. I don't know what the hell is going on. Again, a very bipolar team in there. Alvin Kamara should be able to run very well against the Giants. They should be able to get away from this game a little bit, as well as Saquon versus Carolina. And Alvin Kamara should have a really good game. My third big play, top 12 running back, is going to be James Cook. He is currently 11th overall for fantasy running backs. He's going up against the Rams. This should be a very high-scoring game as well. The Rams give up the 8th most total yards per game. James Cook can catch out of the backfield. Obviously, he's a great runner. The Rams give up the 5th most rushing yards per game. The Bills are playing to get that number 1 seed right now, believe it or not. And I think that the Bills are a much better team than Kansas City is at this point. I understand that. They beat Kansas City. Obviously, it was by 9 points earlier in the year. So they're playing great football. They had a great week last week. If you saw that game, that was really fun to watch. They're fighting for that number 1 seed. And just like Detroit that I mentioned before, they are going to have their foot on the accelerator. They're not going to take it off. They're going to play these guys hard. The Rams have a great offense as well. Kyren Williams, Puka Nacua, Cooper Kupp. I mean, the list goes on. Matthew Stafford's a really good quarterback. I wouldn't say he's an elite quarterback, but they are able to put up a lot of points. So the Bills are going to have to score a lot as well. And you know as well as I do, watching that game last week, Josh Allen can take off. This game is going to be all over the place. There's going to be a lot of point scorers in this one. James Cook is going to get his carries. I think he's going to be a dominant number 1 running back for anyone this week. My running back number 2, and these are the guys that are ranked between 13th and 24th currently in the fantasy football season. My first one is Chase Brown, and what a gift this guy has been. I drafted Zach Moss in one of my leagues, and somebody else had Chase Brown, and then they dropped him a few weeks into the season, and I picked him up as a handcuff, and I could not have imagined a better handcuff to have with Zach Moss, and now he's not on my team anymore. It's all Chase Brown if you've watched any of the Cincinnati games. We talked about Cincinnati before. They put up a lot of points. Everybody gets points. Burrow, Chase, Higgins, Brown, they all get a lot of points. They're playing at Dallas this week. And Dallas gives up the 2nd most rushing yards per game, the 3rd most points per game, at 49.5 over-under on this stat line. This game is tied with the highest over-under in the NFL this weekend with the Bills-Rams that I just mentioned. So a lot of points should happen in this game. A lot of points should happen in that other game that I just talked about. Chase Brown is going to get his. He could break for 20. He can get it at the goal line. He can catch it out of the backfield. Chase Brown is just a fantastic running back for Cincinnati at this point. Number 2 is Bucky Irving. He is 16th overall for fantasy football running backs. Again, we go to another guy in Tampa Bay going to Las Vegas or versus Las Vegas. They're playing in Tampa Bay. How can you not like Bucky this week? I mean, really, how could you not? Besides the fact that he's questionable to play. Maybe that's what it is. Let's go check in on Bucky right now. I just want to pull up real quick to see where he is at, if they have updated his designation in Tampa. And it looks like Bucky Irving is no longer questionable. So that might be the only reason that you have not to start him. Now you have no reason not to start him. If he plays, which it sounds like he is going to, he should have a great day. 26 points last week, 24 points the week before. Dude's rolling right now. So go with him. I would keep Rachaad White on your team if you start him too. They've been sharing carries, obviously, but Bucky Irving is the guy that's getting the majority. 25 weeks on average, or 25 points over the last 2 weeks on average. You can't go wrong with him versus Las Vegas. Tampa Bay could get out to a big lead, and then it'll be the Bucky Irving show. Number 3 is Tony Pollard versus Jacksonville. Another guy versus Jacksonville, and you got to play the matchups. Tony Pollard is a great running back. He's a tier 2 running back at this point in time. And Pollard had a down week last week. I get that because of the Redskins / Commanders got out to a big lead, and it took away from Pollard. This week, you can't expect the same thing to happen with Jacksonville. Mac Jones is a viable quarterback there, but they got Travis Etienne is back as well. But this is going to be more of a running game on the ground. I think Tony Pollard is going to get his. It's going to be a big bounce back week for Tony Pollard. So definitely don't keep him on your bench. Who should you keep on your bench? Well, I mentioned it before. My first guy that you should keep on your bench is Gus Edwards at Kansas City. So the Chargers lost J.K. Dobbins for a while. The Chiefs' run defense is one of the best in the league. Plus, Edwards has not come close to how good he was with the Ravens last season, as I mentioned before. Plus, any long runs or TDs that he gets, I'm sure they're going to be negated by some kind of BS penalty that they'll bring it back, because you can't let the Chargers get out to a lead against the Golden Children Kansas City Chiefs. Kansas City Chiefs need to have that number 1 seed. But Gus Edwards, I wouldn't count on him to do much. Keep him on your bench this week. Number 2, Nick Chubb at Pittsburgh. So I know last time against the Steelers, Chubb had 2 touchdowns. That's what saved the day. So if you want to argue the point that, well, last time that he played the Steelers, he did really well. Yeah, but he also only had 59 rushing yards, and that was on 20 carries. So he's averaging 3 yards per carry against that Pittsburgh defense, which is awesome. You could probably count on Jameis Winston to throw a couple of picks. Maybe he gets around. I don't know. But Nick Chubb at Pittsburgh is not a smart play this week. Without those touchdowns a couple of weeks ago when they played him, he would have given you, 6 points? Not great. I would expect kind of the same thing to happen this week at Pittsburgh. Last time that they faced him, they had the advantage of actually playing at home. Not this time. And I think Pittsburgh is going to have a chip on their shoulder. This could be a big step for Pittsburgh, getting way out ahead of Baltimore in that division. My number 3 must sit is we're sticking with the Chubb and go Chubba Hubbard versus Philly. The Eagles, again, give up the fewest yards per game, the 4th least amount of points per game. It's not a good matchup. The Eagles should get out to an early lead, making the Panthers' run game pretty much non-existent. Don't expect a whole lot from Chuba Hubbard. And even if they did get close to the end zone, that front line, I mean, this is a front line that shut down Derrick Henry pretty well last week. You're really going to tell me that they're not going to be able to shut down Chuba Hubbard? That's just not going to happen. So keep him on your bench. I doubt he's going to do much at all. Here's your sleepers, and these are the guys that are outside of that top 24 for running backs for the week. My first one up is Tyrone Tracy. Don't sleep on this guy. Tyrone Tracy versus New Orleans. He had a good week. It's been, with him, it's I have a good week, I have a bad week. I have a good week, I have a bad week. And that's how it's been for the last 2 months. And he's in line to have a bad week again this week. If you're following that trend, it seems like every other week is either good week, bad week. So somebody out there is playing him and he's not doing well. And then they'll put him on the bench and then he goes off. And then they put him back in on the active roster and then he does crap. Somebody out there, whoever's doing that, I want to know who you are. I got to see this because I just know that somebody is kicking themselves in the butt as much as I'm kicking myself about DJ Moore. Every time I sit him, he has a great game. Every time I don't, which is more times than not, he gives me like 4 points. So Tyrone Tracy, the Saints give up the 3rd most total yards per game, the 5th most rushing yards per game. And as I mentioned before, they've got not a good quarterback situation going on right now with Drew Lock and Tommy DeVito. So Tyrone Tracy is going to be leaned on a lot. I think Malik Neighbors might have been questionable even last night, and we can double check on that one as well, because I am curious to see if they did anything with Malik Neighbors. So let's check out the Giants updates. Malik Neighbors is still showing as questionable. That was as of 11 hours ago. So the passing game might not be great. They're going to have to rely on Drew Lock and Tyrone Tracy. I would bet on Tyrone Tracy before I bet on Drew Lock. If they can get the running game going, you know that they're going to feed Tracy. He could have a big game. Number 2 sleeper, Rico Dowdle. He's currently 27th. And by the way, Tyrone Tracy is currently 28th for running backs overall season to date. Rico Dowdle, 27th and 27th overall for running backs versus Cincinnati, who we already talked about. The Bengals defense is trash. This should really be a very close game. Rico Dowdle's looked good recently. I don't know why they didn't play him more. They're doing this Ezekiel Elliott, Delvin Cook, and Deuce Vaughn, and whatever other crap. You could count on Rico Dowdle to break off a couple of 8 to 10 yard runs every game. He's not a stellar running back, but if Dallas doesn't hang on to him, I think Rico could really do well on a different team as their starting running back. The game script has to go through Dowdle because, again, the Dallas Cowboys, and we can check on this one too. We probably should. We'll get into the wide receivers, but before we get into wide receivers, let's get into CeeDee Lamb because he was questionable as well. I think they might have cleared him. They did clear him. So CeeDee Lamb is good to play. We'll see at what kind of a capacity he's at, 90%, 85%, whatever it is. But you've got Tyrone Tracy, Cooper Rush, behind center there. But I think Rico gets a lot of the majority of the carries. And Dallas is not going to fall behind too much, especially with this defense that the Bengals have. Number 3 is going to be Braylon Allen, and this is a guy. Oh man, this one really bugged me. Braylon Allen, he's currently 47th overall for running backs, going up against Miami, and Breece Hall is out. So obviously, next man up is Braylon Allen. The ground game will have to go through him. They're not going to go through anyone else. If he doesn't get 90% of the carries here, I'd be shocked. He's shown some good flashes. He's got good speed. He's got good size. Braylon Allen, I drafted him early in the year, and I'm just waiting. I'm waiting for something to happen. Maybe Breece Hall goes out and all that kind of stuff. But Braylon Allen, I dropped him a couple of weeks ago, and now look what happened. 2 weeks ago, I dropped Braylon Allen because I had a bunch of bye weeks, and I had to get rid of somebody. So those are your guys for running backs for this week. Your starts, your sits, your sleepers. So let's go ahead and let's take a question right now from Tommy Boy. Gotta love that name. Hi, would you start Mahomes or drop either Mahomes Knicks to pick up and play Darnold? No. Here's the thing. I'm not a big fan of Darnold. I think he's shown flashes of greatness, but they brought in Daniel Jones for a reason, right? They're obviously if you're happy with your quarterback, you don't bring in another quarterback. It's not a long-term deal. It might just be for a backup type of a situation in case Darnold goes down and they're not happy with Nick Mullins. But would you start Mahomes or drop either Mahomes, Knicks to pick up and play Darnold? No, I wouldn't drop Mahomes or Knicks to play Darnold. And I get Atlanta's defense looks really good. And I'll get into a little bit here with the wide receivers. I think Kirk Cousins is going to have as bad as he's playing, he's not going to continue that. I think he's going to have a revenge game coming up here against Minnesota. Not that there should be any revenge. They let him go, rightly so. But yeah, Knicks is too good of a quarterback right now. He's playing too well, even against good defenses. I like him. They've got their bye week this week, obviously. So everybody gets to be, a little bit fresher when they're coming back. So you really can't give up on that one. But I would start Mahomes. I wouldn't have any reservations about him, except for the fact that you're going to get the same kind of results from Mahomes. He'll get you about 15 points. I don't think it's going to be anything special, especially with Pacheco back in the backfield. They still have Kareem Hunt there. They could really go run. And something in the back of my mind is telling me something about Kansas City wide receivers that I should check real quick. So let me get in there. No, nothing there. Yeah, I would stick with Patrick Mahomes. He's got a full arsenal. Travis Kelce, I think, is going to have a really great week against the Chargers this week. So I would feel comfortable with starting Mahomes versus Darnold. I think Darnold is more questionable, even though you got Mahomes throwing a lot of interceptions this year too. But no, that would be my answer. I would not go with Darnold at this point. And just so I know for my own sanity here, I'm going to pull up one more thing, just so I know I'm giving you the best advice. Hey, not a problem, Tommy boy. No worries, man. Thank you for listening. Thanks for the question, too. That was a good one. So we've got Mahomes even coming up here. If you're going to make the playoffs, you've got Mahomes at Cleveland and Houston at home. The only thing that I would worry about is if you're in the playoffs during week 17, you've got him facing Pittsburgh, and I wouldn't put Mahomes up against Pittsburgh at that point in time. Got to play your best guys, right? Mahomes is better than Darnold overall. You're looking at, and here's the side effect of the Sam Darnold thing. So you've got Sam Darnold. He's got a really good matchup this week against Atlanta. If you've got somebody else to drop, and if you're desperate for that quarterback, and I still wouldn't do this, if you've got somebody easy to drop, maybe go ahead and get rid of them. But you're looking at week 15, Darnold plays Chicago again. And I just went over, I'm not comfortable with that matchup. I wouldn't play Brock Purdy, who I think is much better than Sam Darnold. I wouldn't put him up against, he's one of my sitters for this week. I don't like him against Chicago. Then Minnesota has at Seattle, week 16. You never know what the weather is going to be like there. So that's always a question. And then they've got Green Bay, week 17. And I don't like that matchup because Green Bay's got a great pass defense too. So I know that Darnold lit him up the first time. But I don't like Darnold's matchups at all going down the stretch. And if I'm not mistaken, I think Knicks had much better matchups going down the road. Where did Knicks go? Bear with me here. Should be right up front. There he is, Bo Nix. Bo Nix, obviously he's got the bye this week. He's got Indy next week, and I think he'll do very well there. Week 16 at the Chargers. I don't like that matchup. Boy, that's going to be a fun game, though, Denver and the Chargers. But week 17, and this is why you want to keep Bo Nix. He's got Cincinnati in week 17. That's one of the best matchups you can have for quarterbacks. If you make it, and if that's your championship week, which most of them are, week 17, you definitely do not want to get Bo Nix. Somebody is going to pick him up at that point in time, and they're going to ride with him in that championship game. Man, Bo Nix is going to win some fantasy football championships this year. Would you start Kelce over Jonnu Smith? Tell you what, I think I would. I know I got Jonnu Smith coming up in the tight end rankings. Tommy Boy, if you can stick around and wait for that, or come back later and listen to the tight end stuff, definitely do that. I like both at this point. I think I like Kelce just a little bit more. But yeah, hang on if you can wait to hear that through the wide receiver rankings that I've got. On that note, let's get into those. Same thing as running backs, usually starting at least 2 wide receivers, maybe even 3. If you've got a 3 wide receiver league or a 2 wide receiver and a flex. My first one is Drake London. We just talked about Kirk Cousins having a kind of a revenge game coming up versus the Vikings. The Vikings give up the 5th most passing yards per game, so their defense isn't great. We talked about that with Caleb Williams too, why he's not going to be a great play this week. Last 2 weeks was really good. It was against Minnesota and it was against Detroit. So you got to look at the matchups there. London's been mediocre the last month due to really mediocre quarterback play from Kirk Cousins. But I think you have to look at Kirk Cousins on this one. He's going to elevate his game. There are some rumblings out there, and should they start Michael Penix Jr.? This is kind of a big game for Kirk Cousins. I can't imagine that he's going to want to lose his job next year. So he's going to have to show up. He's going to have to win this division, and they're in a good spot to do it. They've got tiebreaker currently over Tampa Bay, even though they got the same record. They're going to need to do something. They've lost 2 games in a row or 3 games in a row now. It's not looking good for Atlanta, but I think Drake London is going to break out of this. Currently ranked number 6 in a 0.5 PPR league. 6th overall is Drake London for wide receivers. Number 2 must start. Not that you're not going to, but Jamar Chase. He's 1st overall in what is predicted again to be one of the highest scoring games of the weekend versus Dallas. And Dallas is a team that gives up the 3rd most points per game. So how can you not like Jamar Chase? The offense seems a little bit deflated. Joe Burrow seems a little bit deflated because of that defense that I've hammered on and, beaten like a dead horse. But at the same time, Jamar Chase still gets so many points. Obviously, he's number 1 for wide receivers. Number 3 is CeeDee Lamb. And I had in here question marks because was CeeDee Lamb going to play? He's on the other side of the ball in Cincinnati. Again, one of the higher scoring games, or predicted to be one of the higher scoring games in the week. Versus Cincinnati, who gives up the 2nd most points allowed per game. So how can you not like anybody on Dallas? How can you not like anybody on Cincinnati? I think a lot of people on these teams are going to blow up. What could go wrong, right? The only thing that could go wrong is if CeeDee Lamb, I think it was a quad for him, gets injured and comes out of the game because Dallas doesn't have a whole lot to play for anymore. Maybe they don't want to injure him long term. Maybe he just gets tired of playing on a crap team with a insufficient coach. Maybe. Wide receiver 2s, and these guys are the wide receivers are between 13 and 24. And again, Malik Neighbors, he's still questionable. 17th overall for wide receivers this year, going up against the Saints, who give up the 4th most passing yards per game. So how can you not like Malik Neighbors? If he's good to go, he is an absolute must start this week. If not, look for Wan'Dale Robinson to blow up. He usually takes over really, really well when Malik Neighbors is not there, and he's really one of the only guys that they can throw to anymore. They might, probably double cover him. They don't have a great, again, the quarterback situation is going to make the game, but they're going to be so far behind, I think, in this game that they're going to have no choice but to pass, and they're going to have to get the ball out to these guys. Especially if you're in a PPR league, might only be, and Wan'Dale is kind of known for this. It's like, 7 yards, 6 yards, 5 yards. He's kind of that short to intermediate route kind of guy. But look for Malik Neighbors. They're going to take a lot of downfield shots. Drew Lock should be playing for a starting role. He should be playing to showcase that he can actually do this. So look for him to take some riskier shots down the field. It's not going to benefit him if he's throwing picks, but he's going to have to keep on doing it. And it might benefit Malik Neighbors or Wan'Dale Robinson. So they're going to need to throw in this game. Number 2 is A.J. Brown. He's actually 20th overall for wide receivers. And A.J. Brown is as consistent a wide receiver number 2 as you can possibly get. Going up against Carolina, he should have no problem getting open. Devonta Smith is back, which definitely helps him out. You might think that, they're going to split time, but Devonta Smith is back, which means he's going to take some focus off of Brown. Maybe they go to Devonta Smith early. The defense kind of divvies up what, they have on the Philadelphia wide receiver on the line. They don't have Dallas Goedert. They do have Grant Calcaterra in today. He hasn't been horrible, but I think they're going to go mostly to A.J. Brown and Devonta Smith. Either one of those guys is a pretty decent play for this game this week. And then number 3 is Cooper Kupp, amazingly 24th overall for wide receivers this year, obviously due to injuries a little bit. But Cooper Kupp versus Buffalo, we mentioned this game before. It's going to be a high-scoring game. Kupp has been phenomenal. 5 out of the last 6 weeks, this guy has been tearing it up. If you stuck with Cooper Kupp, you didn't trade him in the beginning of the year, this guy has been exceptional, with exception of last week. Expect some fireworks in what is expected to be the highest scoring game of the weekend, but 5 out of the last 6 weeks, this guy has been dynamite. Maybe he killed you last week. I hope he didn't. Not great, but look for a bounce back from Cooper Kupp this week. So going over those 6 wide receivers, and there's plenty more that you can definitely start this week, or maybe I even added a couple more, 7, 8 wide receivers. Here's your must sets for the week. Last time that I said to sit Brian Thomas Jr., I was absolutely 100% correct. And people should have listened to me because it was when he was blowing up, and then all of a sudden he had like a 3-point game. Brian Thomas Jr. versus Tennessee, they give up the fewest passing yards per game, and I think you really have to look at that. Mac Jones has had some easy matchups, so he looks like he's been a great quarterback, right? Like, oh my gosh, Patriots really screwed up by letting him go. Look at the matchups that he's had over the last couple of weeks. This is going to be different for Mac Jones. He's not going to have these cushy defenses that are just going to give him everything that he wants. Plus, it took Thomas 10 targets last week just so he could get 4 passes. So that's not a real good ratio. If you're going to throw to a guy 10 times, I would expect him to catch at least 7, maybe 8. So against a tough defense like Tennessee that's been shutting people down, don't look for Brian Thomas Jr. to be your savior this week. I think he's going to put up mediocre numbers at best. If it wasn't for the receiving touchdown, Brian Thomas Jr. would not have had a good fantasy week last week. 4 catches. That was it. That's all he did. So keep him on your bench. Number 2, Adam Thielen. Adam Thielen is back, and I don't know what wide receivers that Carolina actually has anymore because Deontay Johnson is gone and Jonathan Mingo is gone. So Adam Thielen versus Philadelphia. I tell you what, any wide receiver versus Philadelphia, go ahead and just keep him on your bench. We covered the Philadelphia defense and how good Quinyon Mitchell is, how good Darius Slay is, how good Cooper DeJean is. That defense is a shutdown pass defense. Thielen had a good week versus a bad Tampa Bay secondary last week. 8 receptions on 10 targets, got a touchdown. Everything looks great. They're not going against Tampa Bay again this week, though, guys. This will look similar to what he did 2 weeks ago versus the Chiefs when he had 3 receptions on 4 targets, 57 yards. And I think that's an at best for Adam Thielen. Carolina is going to take a big hit downward if anybody was jumping on that bandwagon for them to do something good yet this year. Number 3, I talked about him before, and maybe I'm just bitter. I don't know, but DJ Moore. DJ Moore, this is an easy one for me versus San Francisco. Don't get carried away by DJ's good numbers the last 2 weeks versus division rivals with terrible pass defenses. Again, we talked about this with Caleb Williams. This week, he's coming in as questionable. And let me just look real quick to see if he is still listed as questionable. It looks like DJ Moore is still listed as questionable, as is teammate DeAndre Swift, as is, Roschon Johnson has been officially ruled out. But DJ Moore going through an injury, don't like him this week. He doesn't play consistently when he's healthy. That was 11 hours ago. They have not updated that yet. It is 11 o'clock Central Time. We got games in less than 1 hour. But yeah, DJ Moore, not looking forward. I would not play him this week. Keep him on your bench. This week, he's coming in as questionable against the 49ers, who don't like to give up a lot of passing yards or a lot of yards in general. So just keep him on your bench. Some sleepers that you might be looking for this week. I mentioned it before, Jakobi Meyers, if he plays, he's still listed as questionable. I like Jakobi versus Tampa Bay, and I just mentioned why before is because Tampa Bay's defense gets passed on a lot. So, I mean, shit, even Adam Thielen had a great day last week, and he's got Bryce Young throwing to him. So Jakobi Meyers, if he plays, he's questionable as well last time I checked. So watch for this one as well. He would be a great sleeper. He's currently ranked 29th overall for wide receivers. He's also gotten, and get this, guys, catch this, if you will, wide receivers. He's also gotten 26 targets in the last 2 games. The Raiders are going to have to be throw happy again, and he's going to be the guy that gets a lot of the receptions here. So 26 targets. He's averaging 13 targets in the last 3 games. That's phenomenal. He's your go-to guy. He's the money play. Hopefully he just plays, but he would be a great sleeper for you. My second one is going to be Calvin Ridley again versus Jacksonville. I like anybody going against Jacksonville. In recent weeks, I know Nick Westbrook has been the go-to guy, scoring some big fantasy points. But this week, I think it turns back to Ridley, especially against Jacksonville. He's probably been griping in the locker room, hey, I'm not getting my touches, not getting my touches. He is 27th overall for wide receivers. But I think he has a pretty good day against Jacksonville. I would even say he's going to catch at least 1 touchdown today. Calvin Ridley should be a very solid play. And my third sleeper, he's outside of the top 50. And I kind of hinted at him before. Quentin Johnston. And I know you're just thinking like, God, you can't catch a football. He's had some dropsy issues. I get it. I think he's going to have a huge bounce back game this week versus their hated rival, the Kansas City Chiefs, because he has to. McConkey is still listed as questionable. Herbert is going to have to throw the ball to somebody, right? I mean, is it going to be Joshua Palmer? Palmer hasn't done much of anything this year, which is really disappointing. He started off as a number 1 wide receiver on that team, and then all of a sudden now he's number 3. Could be a number 2 today if Ladd McConkey doesn't play, but look for him to see some increased targets as well. I don't think Herbert's going to have a choice. He's going to have to go to Quentin Johnston. He's going to have to make some plays. It's just going to have to happen. And I hope that they have a kind of a wake-up game here against Kansas City. I would really love to see the Chargers split this series with them and make that division a lot more fun to watch going down the stretch. So there's your wide receivers. Let's get into the tight ends because Tommy Boy wants to know about who he needs to play this week between Kelsey and Jonnu Smith. So here are my top 3. Here's my no-brainers, tight ends. Again, someone that should be talked about in the offensive rookie of the year, and he's not for some reason. It's all about Jaden Daniels and Bo Nix. Brock Bowers is the number 1 fantasy tight end this year. Who saw that coming? This guy. I drafted Brock Bowers. I love this story because I drafted him and I could overhear somebody, because it was a live draft, go, what is he thinking? Yeah, I was thinking that I couldn't wait another round to get Brock Bowers. The guy's amazing. I mean, is he good or what? Going up against Tampa Bay, we already talked about how bad Tampa Bay's pass defense is. They give up the 7th most passing yards to tight ends. This is a must start. Brock Bowers is, and especially with Jakobi Meyers maybe not playing, this is going to be a feast day. They might even double cover him, which is, you usually don't hear about that unless it's like Travis Kelce, right? They might double cover Brock Bowers just so he can't get his hands on the damn ball. Cade Otton is another must start. He is 9th overall for tight ends. Look for a bounce back game coming up with Cade Otton on the other side of the ball here from Las Vegas. Las Vegas gives up the 3rd most receiving yards to tight ends. This is a must-win game for the Bucs. We kind of talked about that. Again, it's been a reoccurring topic here. The Bucs got to win, man. They are tied with Atlanta right now. They're going to do everything possible. Look for them to, go for it on 4th down every time. Obviously, unless it's like 4th and 9 at their own 15-yard line. But I would look for Tampa Bay to just shoot this game out, try to get as many points as they possibly can. So I would say Cade Otton must start this week. And number 3 is Trey Bride. Trey Bride is currently 3rd overall for tight ends. While not my favorite matchup for tight ends this week, it makes sense that Geno Smith will continue to check down. He's done that. Geno Smith hasn't put up a lot of great points. He's somewhere between 12 and 16 every week. But I'm sorry, Trey McBride. I'm talking about Seattle here. Trey McBride, Kyler Murray, duh. Look for Kyler Murray to continue to check down. Marvin Harrison was the guy that I was thinking of in my head. Marvin Harrison Jr. He's checking down a lot, but he's getting it done. Arizona is still in the hunt in that NFC West with 24 receptions on 27 targets over the last 2 games. I told you the stat about Jacoby Myers. Trey McBride is right there with him. 24 receptions on 27 targets. That's asinine, man. That's 13 to 14 looks every game. This is a matchup that you just have to take with Trey McBride. The moment that you have been waiting for, Mr. Tommy Boy. I'm going to give you some answers, and then I'm going to give you some different answers. How about that? Must sit. My first must sit that I had for this week is Jonnu Smith. And he's number 4 overall for tight ends versus the New York Jets. But here's the thing about the New York Jets. I question what defense we're going to see with the New York Jets. I question what that locker room looks like with all of the animosity with Aaron Rodgers and what is happening there. Jonnu Smith has been hot the last few weeks. Not that I didn't predict that coming in the beginning of the year. I said that Jonnu Smith, being the number 2 guy in Atlanta last year with Kyle Pitts, they were, and I don't have the numbers in front of me, but Kyle Pitts and Jonnu Smith were both in the top 20, I think, for receptions and receiving yards for tight ends. And then when he went to Miami, I was like, wow, that's just another great weapon. And then they didn't use him in the beginning of the year. So I knew that Jonnu Smith was going to have a decent year this year, or a good year this year. Here's the crappy thing. I drafted Jonnu Smith in the beginning of the year, had to drop him due to injuries, picked him back up in October, and then dropped him in November again. And now he's on fire. So the guy can play. I'm a firm believer in Jonnu Smith. I love that guy. But the Jets gave up the 4th fewest receiving yards to tight ends. And I think that's what you really have to look at. That's why I don't love this matchup. You've got a quarterback back there in Tua. He doesn't want to get hit. He should be getting rid of the ball quick. And that automatically, in my mind, says you're tight end, right? I think he's going to cool off a little bit from where he's been, but he's been playing hot the last few weeks. And here's the thing, Tommy Boy, my number 2 must sit is Travis Kelce versus the Chargers, purely because I don't like the matchup. The Chargers give up the 6th fewest yards to tight ends per game. So you've got a very similar situation with Jonnu Smith and Travis Kelce. Who do you think is going to put up, the bigger numbers? And honestly, for that, I would probably... I would want to check out the over-under as maybe a tiebreaker on who I give you. I'm leaning toward Jonnu Smith just because you never know what Jets defense that you're going to get. And every time that I've said, hey, the Jets defense is really good, they crap the bet on me, and I just wonder what the hell they're doing. Give me 1 second here. I want to log into one thing. Since I had both of your guys on a must-sit situation, that's not a real good answer. But I would say play the hot hand, play Jonnu Smith, hope for the Jets to be dysfunctional as they have been. The over-under is something that you should always look at in each one of these games. The over-under in the Jets-Dolphins game is currently 45, and the over-under in the Kansas City Chiefs game is 43. So again, slight edge to, I would say, Jonnu Smith. Play the hot hand. Go with him. Who knows what's going to happen? I wouldn't be surprised if the Jets benched Rodgers at some point during the game. I don't really know, but Jonnu Smith, I would say in a non-PPR league, I think he's got the best chance of gaining more yards. If what I think is going to happen in that Kansas City Los Angeles Chargers game, I think Kansas City gets out to a lead. I'm not real happy with the offensive situation that the Chargers have, and that being no Ladd McConkey, maybe. Definitely no J.K. Dobbins, and if they have to rely on some other weapons, it could be a lot of 3-and-outs for the Chargers, which means that running side of the Kansas City team, let's face it, Patrick Mahomes is not putting up MVP numbers this year. I'm thinking they're going to run the ball. They're going to run the clock. This is a division rival. Andy Reid's a smart coach. So the more that I think about it, kind of playing both sides here, I would say go with Jonnu Smith. Miami actually does have something to play for. I believe they're still in the playoff hunt as well, but they are far out. Or I should say they're not as close as the Chargers are anyway. The Chargers are almost guaranteed a spot right now. So Go with Jonnu Smith. I'm going to go with my initial gut feeling that I had 3.5 months ago when I was telling people to draft Jonnu Smith and don't let him slip. I'm going to put my money where my mouth is there, and I'm going to say Jonnu Smith. How's that, Tommy boy? All right, my third must sit for the week is Cole Kmet versus San Francisco. San Fran gives up the third fewest yards to tight ends. Kmet has been targeted more than 4 times in only one game over the last 6. So Cole Kmet, as hot as Jonnu Smith has been, Cole Kmet has been just as cold. He's not even getting targeted at this point. He can be left on the bench comfortably. I don't even think that there's a question there unless you absolutely have to play him. If you had Mark Andrews and Dalton Schultz and you had to, play Cole Kmet or whatever the situation is, you can leave him on the bench. Here's some sleepers to look at. If you don't like any of the tight ends that you've got, I don't know how many of these guys are going to be available for you, but my number one sleeper this week is Pat Freiermuth. He's currently 16th for tight ends overall versus Cleveland this week, who is going to bring the heat on defense. They will force Wilson to get the ball out quick. Obviously, they've got a great guy on the defensive end there in the name of Myles Garrett, who's going to be coming in hot. Wilson's going to have to get rid of the ball quick, more than likely. I like that situation as a tight end, Pat Freiermuth. And I think that you also had, let me check. I'm going to check one thing with, where did it go? George Pickens was questionable. So this might be even another reason to go for Pat Freiermuth. And it looks like George Pickens, does that say out? Wow, that does say out. George Pickens has been ruled out as of about 40 minutes ago. Pickens is inactive for the game. So now I love Pat Freiermuth. Wow, that's a development. I'm going to have to change one of my lineups here real quick. You've got Van Jefferson, Calvin Austin, and Pat Freiermuth. Those are going to be the guys that are going to be catching balls this week. Maybe Mike Williams gets in there as well. He had a really good showing one game. But, Pat Freiermuth, number 16 overall, I would go with him for sure at this point in time. George Pickens being ruled out. Talking about another guy who's been ruled out for a tight end, Dallas Goedert is out again. So Grant Calcaterra will take over as the tight end number 1 versus Carolina, who gives up the most passing yards per game to tight ends. Look for him if you're desperate. I guess we've talked about this before. Really should become a running game in Philadelphia versus Carolina, unless Carolina decides that they're going to, do everything that they possibly can to get all the points possible and really put on a show with nothing to lose, everything to gain in Carolina. But yes, Grant Calcaterra might be a good play for you this week versus the Philadelphia Eagles or versus the Carolina Panthers, even though the Eagles did get Devonta Smith back this week. So there's just one more weapon. Number 3 is Will Dissly for the Chargers versus Kansas City. With the question of whether Ladd McConkey will play or not, Dissly could be in line for more looks this week if it's just Quentin Johnston and Joshua Palmer. Kansas City also gives up the 4th most passing yards per game to tight ends because of the same kind of a thing, right? They bring on a big pass rush. You're not going to be able to run the ball very well against them. You're going to have to get rid of the ball, which is where Will Dissly comes into play. So there's your tight ends, and we're going to move on to defenses now at this point. We've got about 45 minutes until games start up. Here are your defenses that are the must-start defenses, and these should be no-brainers. My first must-start defense, sitting at number 4, or at least it's a top 5 fantasy football defense, Pittsburgh versus Cleveland, because you know damn well Jameis Winston will inevitably turn the ball over at least 3 times. The Steelers also have the most takeaways of any team in the NFL. So that's terrible. That's not looking good for Cleveland at this point in time. Pittsburgh is going to be your must-start defense for the week. That's your number 1. Number 2, I love Buffalo. They're in the top 6, maybe top 7 for defenses. At the Rams, we kind of did say that was going to be a high-scoring game, so you're probably wondering, well, what the hell are you talking about here? If they're going to put up maybe 25 points, well, I think Buffalo is going to be doing most of the scoring in that game. It wouldn't surprise me if it was 35-15. Buffalo has the highest turnover differential of any team in the NFL. That's why I like them. And I wouldn't be surprised if Buffalo's defense scores in this game. The Rams are going to have to throw a lot. Matthew Stafford hasn't been as accurate as he has in the past. He's got some great weapons out there. They'll probably force him into a turnover. It could be a potential pick six. So I like Buffalo. My third favorite defense this week is going to be Philadelphia. We talked a lot about this one against Carolina. Philadelphia's defense is currently 11th overall in fantasy football formats. At least they're a top 12, depending on what kind of a format that you're in. The Panthers scored the third fewest points per game. The Eagles give up the fourth fewest points per game. So this one is just a no-brainer. Maybe they don't get the turnovers, but this is going to be a very low-scoring game if you're looking at just that stat line. Carolina really shouldn't be able to put up more than 10 to 13 points against Philadelphia this week. Your must-sit defenses. We're looking at the LA Rams is the first one. Don't like them against Buffalo. I kind of already mentioned that. I think in that game where it's going to be a very high-scoring game, potentially 50 points, you're probably looking at a 30-20, 35-15 type of, percentage, I guess, or points differential. The Rams versus Buffalo, who score the second most points per game, just not good. I wouldn't recommend, and I wouldn't have recommended Thursday night that you go ahead and start the Packers either with, the Lions scoring the first or the most points per game. So definitely don't start the Rams this week. Don't start Dallas this week versus Cincinnati. Please stay away. Stay very, very, very far away. Cincinnati scores the fifth most points per game. Dallas gives up the third most points per game. So that's just not a good look. Dallas hasn't been great on defense all year long. They're probably one of the worst defenses that you can have on your team. If you do have them on your team, please drop them. They're not going to do anything. Minnesota is my third must sit this week. And I mentioned this before. I might be going out on a limb. I don't think I am. Minnesota is actually second in fantasy football format. So they've got a great defense overall for fantasy stats. Versus Atlanta and Kirk Cousins, though, I don't like the revenge game factor. And being from Minnesota and watching a lot of Minnesota games, I don't know what it is about this one, but I see Vikings blunder written all over this. They need to win. They need to keep up. They can get a game ahead of Green Bay, to get that number 4 seed or the number 5 seed in the NFC playoffs. Cincinnati, I'm sorry. I just don't like it. If Atlanta put up 50 points on the Vikings, I wouldn't be surprised at all. I think Kirk Cousins really comes forward this week, and it's going to be a disappointing day once again for Minnesota fans. My sleepers, if you're wondering who you should start, who's got the best matchups out there, New Orleans has a great matchup. I mentioned this one before. New Orleans is 20th overall in fantasy football. So they're not going to be a normal pick if you got to pick up a defense. Maybe you're short. New Orleans as 20th overall versus Drew Lock and the New York Giants. The Saints are one of the most, like I mentioned this before, they're one of the most bipolar teams in the NFL this year. So start them at your own risk, really. However, they could have a very big day against Drew Lock, a questionable Malik Neighbors, that New York Giants team that has nothing to play for at this point. They could be putting up some big points this week against the Giants. Number 2 sleeper is Jacksonville. Kind of bashed them earlier, and they are a terrible defense fantasy-wise. So you almost have to wonder why. I'm saying Jacksonville, they're like 30th overall. But versus Tennessee, who's tied for the third most sacks allowed, and they score the 5th fewest points per game. So you have to look at it from a perspective of, Jacksonville might give up 30 points. But it's not going to beat a Tennessee. Tennessee doesn't score that well. Tennessee's offensive line gives up a lot of sacks. Like I mentioned before, there was a game where Will Levis, when I put him in replacement of Joe Burrow one week, I thought it was a great matchup, and he got sacked like 8 or 9 times. So Jacksonville can do the same thing. They should be able to get some points, maybe on turnovers, but definitely from their sacks. So if you're desperate, go to Jacksonville. Tampa Bay versus the Raiders. Here's another one where Las Vegas scores the 6th fewest points per game, and they've allowed the 6th most sacks. So I'm not looking for Las Vegas to score a lot of points against Tampa Bay, as bad as their defense is. And with Jacoby Myers questionable for that game, Madison is still out. Zamir White is still out. Amir Abdullah has been doing admirable. So he's been doing pretty good, but that offense is not running on all cylinders. So Tampa Bay should have a very decent game. Like I said, the Raiders give up a lot of sacks. Tampa Bay gets sacks. So you should be able to get some points from Tampa Bay at this point. All right. Let me see. What are your thoughts on Cardinals? I have Eagles starting, but Cards on the bench. Yeah, no, I'd stick. Here's the thing. And it was funny to me that the Cardinals, a lot of people are saying Cardinals in a favorable matchup against Seattle. I don't like that matchup. Is anybody else looking at this and going, Seattle's playing for the division. They've got some great weapons. Jackson Smith-Njigba has stepped up. I get that Walker isn't playing, but Zach Charbonnet is no slouch. He can still run the ball pretty damn effectively. They still have DK Metcalf. They still have Tyler Lockett. They could put up a lot of points. So I'm not, saying that the Arizona Cardinals are a favorable matchup against Seattle. Just there's something about that doesn't sit well with me. So if you have the Eagles starting, Eagles are going against Carolina. And I think, I kind of mentioned it before, Carolina really has nothing to play for, but they don't have a lot of weapons there either. I mean, who's their best weapon? It's their running back. What's the best thing about, I was just going to say, what's the best thing about Philadelphia's defense? Everything. Their front line shut down Derrick Henry last week. I've already mentioned a few times Quinyon Mitchell and Darius Slay and Cooper DeJean. I don't think Carolina scores more than 13 points in this game versus Philadelphia. And once Philadelphia gets out to a lead, they can run all day long, whether it's with Saquon or Gainwell or whoever they want to stick in there. I don't like the Cardinals. I like the Eagles way, way more. If you don't have another option out there, sure, I guess maybe play the Cardinals, but I just don't like that game. Is anyone else with me on that one? Like, the Cardinals defense is not stellar. It's not a great fantasy defense. And I'm just going to look it up real quick just so I know that I'm not going insane. Cardinals defense, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. I guess they're a top 12 defense. I would call it low top 12. Philadelphia I show is 11, so they're just a little bit above them. But I like the matchup versus Carolina better. Yeah, I'm just not a fan of the Seattle one. All right, guys, come on now. We got 30 minutes till game time. Let's see if some more questions out there. What do we got? While y'all are thinking, I'm going to go ahead and make some changes here to my lineup, knowing that George Pickens is officially out. Pickens out. That is crazy. Here's the one benefit is I had Goff and Gibbs and Kraft. So I'm already out to a very healthy lead in this league. So I guess I will start Pickens. Hey, how about this? How about I ask you guys a question? So I've got Pickens and my replacements, and it has to be a wide receiver. I've got Joshua Palmer, who I talked about. I've got Garrett Wilson against Miami. I've got Khalil Shakir in what should be a blowout game against LA. And I've got Devonta Smith all on my bench. This is a very deep league, by the way, 12 teams. 12 teams, 20 people. Got a healthy bench. It's a lot of it is based off of the draft. And what I've always said before, you don't win your fantasy football league in the draft, but you can certainly lose it in the draft. Got to make plays. I tell you what, I think I'm going to put in – I'm leaning Garrett Wilson, even though I'm not a fan of Aaron Rodgers right now. He's got 143.8 points in a half PPR, which ranks him 57th overall, versus Khalil Shakir, 105.3. It puts him at 121st overall. And Devonta Smith, obviously, we've got some injuries there. Devonta Smith, 96.1, puts him 143rd overall. But I wasn't caring for Devonta Smith over the last couple of weeks when he was playing. He's been out for the last 2 versus the Rams and versus Baltimore. But before then, it was 5 points and 2.5 points. Probably going through that injury bug. So if you're like me, I'm going to put Pickens on my bench. I'm going to put Garrett Wilson in. Got to play the hot hand, even though it's a terrible matchup against that Miami secondary. I think Garrett Wilson's going to have a better day than Khalil Shakir. But that's a pretty damn good play. Hey, not a problem, Tommy boy. Thanks for listening in. If nobody else has any kind of questions here, man, I almost feel like I want to sit on here for about 20 more minutes just to answer any questions that might be coming around, because we got game times. This is an important week, isn't it? Also, if you're listening, if you'd like to join, I can send a link out at any time, right? So if you wanted to join, I'll take a look. I'll ask you maybe a few questions. We'll see if we've got some good rapport here. Shout out to my buddy Sean at Yardbarker and Total Apex Sports. Sorry he couldn't be here today, but it's funny because we are usually on the same page, so you know that we're both giving you pretty darn good advice. Tell you what, I'm going to hang out for maybe 2 or 3 more minutes. If nobody else has any other questions, then I'm going to take off for the day, and I'm going to make sure that my lineups are all good. Boy, that Garrett Wilson thing is bugging me. Projected 11. Khalil Shakir projected 11.5. Ugh, decisions. Like Matthew Perry says, you got to play your studs. What do we have? What do we have? All right, y'all. Thanks for listening today. Appreciate it. I'm going to jump off here. It is 11:35. Appreciate everybody for tuning in. Thanks for all the great questions. Good luck in your fantasy football matchups. And as always, you can see it right down here at the bottom. Go ahead and follow, like, subscribe. Follow me on X. That will let you know when I do the live streams. It's not always at the same time every week. Also, might not do it live all the time. So check me out on YouTube and follow it there. Otherwise, have a great week, everyone. We'll be covering waivers for next week if you're in the playoffs, the good, the bad, the ugly, all that fun stuff. Have a great week, everyone. Thanks.